for joining us. Hope everybody's safe and well. So today we are joined by Nadia Soliman. Very excited to have her today. Before I go on to introducing who Nadia is and what she's going to be talking about, I just want to do a quick announcement to say that the King's Open Research Conference is next week. You can, I'll post the link to this Google slide on the Q&A window, so you can just click on this link here, which will take you to the Eventbrite page, which I'll just quickly open. And you can register on the Eventbrite page here. You don't have to register, it's just for updates, and we will send you the link as well. It looks like it's going to be quite a packed day. There's about 1,100 people that have signed up. So yes, please do attend. It should be good fun. So today we're going to be joined by Nadia Soliman, and Nadia is a PhD student at Imperial College London, and she had a previous life in the British Armed Forces. And Nadia is going to talk to us about a really important area that's sort of not very much discussed. And by pure mistake, we've kind of had a theme over the past few weeks, with Roger Gina Sorolla talking about reform, and also Daniel Larkins as well. And it's quite nicely going to be rounded off by Nadia, who will talk about who are going to be the leaders and how can these people knit together different initiatives and show by example how we should behave, and in accordance with reproducible and transparent research and open research principles more broadly. So I will stop rabbiting on. If anybody does have any questions to ask Nadia, please put them in the Q&A window, and we will compile and feed them to Nadia at the end of the talk. So Nadia, I will stop sharing and pass it over to you. So thank you again, Nadia, and I will just exit now. So, okay. Okay, you're good to go.
Okay, thanks Sam, and thank you to the R.I.O.T. Sadly, I've been watching R.I.O.T grow from afar, unable to make the club in person. But since it's gone online, I've absolutely loved it. So thank you to Sam and the team and all the speakers and listeners. It's really good to be invited to talk, and I'm very excited. So I'm Nadia, a PhD student at Imperial. Some of you will have read my bio and know that I've recently returned to academia, having had a short career in the army. My PhD is actually focused on improving the feasibility and accuracy of preclinical systematic reviews. And systematic reviews are really vital research tools for making evidence-based decisions. And although vital, they're still relatively novel in preclinical sciences. And the focus of these reviews really does include improving methodological quality and identifying publication bias to inform future research agendas. So research integrity is also really a key component to my research. But then the leadership aspect. So my return to academia, I suppose, hasn't always been as smooth as I would have liked it to be. And I have to admit that I have struggled and continue to struggle sometimes with the culture. In particular, what's most alien to me is sort of the individualistic nature of academia and how we're not prepared or developed adequately enough for the challenges of academic life, both those for formal and informal leadership roles. And so I've since started discussing and delivering leadership development to create a more positive research culture that puts people at the centre. And so my talk today, although based upon research integrity, still has people at the centre, both in terms of what we do as academics, but how we can improve to have a more positive impact more widely. Can't move on my slide. Okay. So I think many of us here today are scientists, and as scientists, I can imagine that, like me, you've been completely consumed by COVID-19, particularly at the beginning. The pace of the publications, the quality of the research, the lack of evidence, how the evidence was being synthesized, the conflicting opinions, how decisions were being made, were they based on truth or scientific fact, or is it all just political will? And we are in a really strange and stressful and sensitive time, and scientists have been thrust into the limelight, and I don't think scientists have ever been considered so vital, they've ever been held in such high regard, nor have they ever been so carefully watched by the scientific community as well as the general public. Especially for us in the UK, it doesn't seem that long ago that Michael Gove, when he was Justice Secretary, stated that Britain had had enough of experts. Yet now we are a nation of armchair epidemiologists. But what this crisis has highlighted to me is the continued need for the advocacy and implementation of open science practices. Not just open access for during a pandemic, but open science practices that are ingrained within our processes, and that we have funding to support the infrastructure that's required, so that should we be faced with another crisis, we're better prepared to respond. It's also a time that highlights the need for leadership, everywhere and in everyone. Sadly, we have watched revered and highly respectable scientists behave no differently, some through their work, others through their actions, to the likes of Dominic Cummings and many other government officials the world over, and have failed to lead by example. Suggestions of fraud are starting to emerge of studies published in leading medical journals that have led to the halting of trials around the world and potentially could cause much greater harm. The lack of integrity is undermining public trust in science. And so, as I take you on a whistle-stop tour of my professional career, I'd like you to consider, who are we here to serve and how should we do that? For me, leadership is a fundamental skill of academic service, and through my talk, I'll explain how I believe the basic principles of leadership can be adopted so that research and researchers can thrive. I aim to encourage debate and discussion. I don't claim to have all the answers, but when we get to it, I also welcome for you to share your own experiences, the good, the bad and the ugly, and use this time to reflect as well. So a bit about me, I guess. So I started university at Liverpool, graduated in 2007 with a pharmacology degree. During my undergrad years, I joined the University Officer Training Corps as I had aspirations to join the army. And like many undergraduates, I wanted to develop skills that would help me stand out in the job market. And so it was here that I first started to understand leadership. And I think it was really important that the fundamental principles of leadership were introduced to me at a really early career stage, because these are the skills that people carry forward throughout, regardless of whether they stay within academia or join the army or do anything else. It's just critical to our professional careers. But upon graduating, I was debating applying for PhDs or joining the army. But because you can only join the army when you're young, that's what I chose to do. I wanted to be challenged, I wanted the adventure and the responsibility, and so I chose the army. And so I went to the Royal Military Academy in Sandhurst in a very snowy January in 2009, and it's regarded as the best leadership academy in the world. And all British Army officers are trained there. And I started with 33 other young women. We formed 11 platoon. We were commonly referred to as the girls platoon, and we'd been selected based upon our potential for leadership. And the course was a very demanding, physically and mentally demanding course. We learnt very, very quickly that it was necessary to work as a team. We had to work well together and work hard for one another. And without fostering such a team ethos, we would have failed to succeed. And I had numerous jobs whilst I was serving in the army, including an operational tour in Afghanistan, but had operational responsibilities within the UK and Northern Ireland as well. So my first job, I started as a troop commander, and I was responsible for 30 soldiers, 30, maybe a few more from time to time. I was responsible for their careers, their training, their well-being, and a few £1 million of equipment. When I became a training officer, I had the responsibility of training delivery for over 1,000 troops. And then when I became a squadron second in command, I had to ensure the capability of approximately 200 people to make sure that everyone was adequately trained and had all the correct skills to be able to do the job and meet our operational commitments. So I was technically trained as a Royal Engineer, Bomb Disposal Officer and Explosive Hazard Risk Mitigation Advisor, but I also had a more generic role as well. And these are the skills that are required through all the jobs as an Army officer, although with differing levels of responsibility, most of which I received specific training for. And although there are silos in the Army, they aren't as small as in academia, so there are always ways in which you can ask people for help. And all officers within the Army are personnel managers, they're project managers, they're budget managers, they're teachers, coaches, mentors. But first and foremost, we're leaders, and we have the responsibility for people, for others, and that is a real privilege. So I've been around the world building teams to be effective, and I have to use my professional knowledge to motivate and inspire and help others to achieve our goals. And leaders really, first and foremost, sort of unlock their team's potential, and they use coaching and mentoring to make the team stronger. And also during these times, from my training and beyond, I've learned a lot more about myself. I understand how I respond to stress and pressure, and how to ensure that I try to maintain a positive influence despite the challenges that I may be facing. And you may be wondering how this all relates, but these are really important transferable skills that can be used in any context. So if I cross out officer and insert PI, I think it makes much clearer comparison. PIs are principal investigators, are project managers, fund managers, people managers, teachers, trainers, coach, mentors, they're leaders. And the skills that we learn during our PhD and postdoctoral research are typically not those required to lead a research group. And my understanding is that little or no training in personnel management, project management, budget management, teaching, coaching, mentoring is received, and little is available for those who do seek it out. And yet these are the skills that are actually required on a daily basis. So in academia, promotion's predicated upon how good you are, and we can put a question mark against that as a scientist or academic, and not whether you are actually prepared for the next job. And individuals are promoted to senior positions on the basis of their academic credentials, and we also know how some of those metrics to be very flawed, and that they don't necessarily reflect the skills that are required in the position. And in this context, the fact that some people then struggle with the demands of the role is not a surprise. They haven't been adequately prepared, and this will have a negative impact on everybody and our research outputs. So I'm sure there are some skeptics in our audience that are thinking the situation is different in academia. How can you compare the Army? How could it possibly relate, and vice versa? But to me, they're actually really similar. They're large organisations, historical institutions made up of very small units that perform different roles, who come together to tackle some of the greatest challenges. Both the organisations are dependent upon people doing great things that work globally and across cultures. Additionally, we all know that academic life is demanding, and it's not dissimilar to the Army. People can think of it more than a career. It's a vocation and a lifestyle, and we make large sacrifices to be in academia. And for many people, there are great barriers that force talented people, more so women and ethnic minorities, people of lower socioeconomic backgrounds, to leave. And in the Army, I think one of the stark differences is the culture. It's not individualistic, a much more team-orientated culture persists. And I believe that what is required in our context is a change in culture, from one that incentivizes a self-orientated inward focus to one that looks more outward and is group-orientated. It's no wonder that that we're yet to change. You know, the people in senior positions who perhaps have the most power to drive change have profited in a system that exists and may not be aware of the challenges and inequity that persists, and nor are they incentivized to drive the change. For the most part, probably do not feel equipped to do so either, and this will have a negative impact on everybody. So the Sandhurst motto is serve to lead, and this is something you must truly embody, as unless you give everything for your team, your soldiers and your subordinates, you'll fail. You must put the safety, well-being and comfort of others above that of your own. And at Sandhurst, we not only equip to operate in conventional combat situations or for war fighting, a large part of our training is about values and standards and the leadership code. We have responsibilities that are never relinquished, and these are courage, discipline, respect for others, integrity, loyalty, and self-commitment. And they're much more than just words on a page. They're what we stand for. And so it's important to note that leadership training also doesn't just start and stop at Sandhurst, nor is it the exclusive business of officers. Leadership training is delivered to everyone, and with every promotion there are further courses and training to prepare you for the next job. It's continual development, evaluation and evolution. And that's the stark difference between the army and academia. It's training leadership. The army does it really well. They recognise key stages of the career pathway and ensure that people are prepared for their job. So before we go any further, I think it's important to understand what leadership is and consider it in the academic context. There isn't a single definition of leadership, and we can all perhaps think of examples of good and bad leadership, but encapsulating that into a definition isn't easy. So the description that I have up on the slide is really based on a transformational model of leadership. This is the theory of a leader working with a team to identify a need to change, to create a vision, to guide the team through, bringing the team together and solving a problem. It's perhaps more important to understand what it's not. So often in academia, leadership is conflated with management, in particular senior management. And although the two are linked, they are separate. Management is the processes, it's the writing a report on time, whereas managing leadership is the effort that you spend doing that and the influence and impact that you have on a person or people, helping them to achieve the goals. So I'd like to highlight some of the aspects of academic leadership culture that are perhaps most alien to me. So firstly, there is a focus on leadership being the exclusive business of an individual in a formal position, usually held at a relatively senior point in their career. And the most frustrating thing about this is that those individuals haven't necessarily been selected based upon their leadership ability. And I also would like to say that in the most simplest sense, a leader is someone who has influence over another. And so in academia, there are actually many informal leadership positions. For example, most PhD students and postdocs supervise undergraduate and master's students. So why don't we invest in their leadership training and recognise them in that role? And then we can all be held to account. A common misconception of the army is that its extreme hierarchical structure means that we operate with a strict command and control, you know, someone barking orders to get things done, which is just very far from the truth. In fact, it uses the hierarchy to empower everyone at a lower level, which means that they can operate independently and demonstrate leadership and initiative where possible. Also in academia, I feel that training is not something that is prioritised, and training is important in every walk of life, and you can build confidence through imaginative, interesting and progressive training. It builds a physical, mental and emotional strength, and it gives an individual confidence in themselves and their team. But this only happens if the training is realistic and orientated to the situation. And in academia, there really does seem to be a sink or swim culture. We're all sort of self-taught. And so for me, it's just no wonder that people really do struggle. And so my last point on this slide is perhaps what I struggle with the most. Academia can be a very lonely and isolating place. And so I would like to challenge us to be a lot less individualistic and become more team orientated. If we can support each other better, we will improve our research outputs and we will then improve what we give back to society. And so changing behaviour begins with evolving beliefs. When we begin to value or reward something, people will begin to do it, and more people will begin to do it. So I think it's important that we return to our values. There doesn't appear to be a well-defined and documented value base for academics to refer to. So I'd like to take us back to first principles and ask ourselves, what are our values, and reflect on how, if we do have behaviours that uphold our values. Values provide the guiding principles for what we do, and how we manifest these values does much to define us as individuals and the institutions in which we work. And when values are followed, they provide a basis for trust and confidence. In the worst instances, equipping everyone with an understanding of our values and leadership behaviours will empower people to speak truth to power when it is most needed. So with that in mind, I started developing an academic leadership code with the shared values of academic freedom, scholarly excellence, mutual respect, collaboration and integrity, and some desired leadership behaviours. And this is to ensure that through these behaviours, our values are communicated and upheld. And these behaviours create a positive environment for people in research to thrive. Leadership behaviours are inextricably linked to our research behaviours as well. So our values. Academic freedom is the freedom to teach, to study, to conduct research without external censure or constraint. A focus on scholarly excellence ensures that we can make meaningful contributions to human knowledge. Mutual respect between individuals builds effective and collaborative teams. Collaborative working, now often interdisciplinary and international, is an increasing feature of academic research, and it offers us an opportunity to really expand, exchange our ideas, have access to more resources and knowledge and equipment. And integrity, academics must be honest, fair, transparent, accountable. We have to stand up for what is right and uphold a moral and ethical code. And so we need to have leadership behaviours to uphold these values, setting example and matching our words with our actions. You've got to be self-aware, have humility, be open to improving. Developing others includes teaching, coaching, mentoring, intellectual challenge, but also promoting health and well-being and self-care. And leaders in academia must actively build teams and foster collaborations within and outside of their immediate team. And team collaborations can be developed just by setting up common projects that have common goals and objectives. And so people's roles are mutually supportive, cooperative, inclusive, rather than being independent. And with that, we should strive for team goals, to be supportive, to continue to build up, but also recognise failure and destigmatise it. And then we can celebrate the successes. We all need to ensure that our behaviours do not undermine our values. And if they do, then we need to challenge that. Inappropriate behaviour needs to be held to account, but any response must be judicious, fair, appropriate, legal, and that will maintain faith and trust in the leader. So leadership based upon people is very important, but we also have to consider what our objectives are. In the army, it's the ability to get people to operate within really highly complex fluid environments while maintaining our values and standards. In academia, it's finding collaborative solutions to extremely complex problems whilst obeying our ethical code. The objectives are not too dissimilar. A focus on scholarly excellence ensures we can make meaningful contributions to society and to our knowledge base. Integrity stems from a Latin word meaning wholeness or completeness. When applied to behaviour, integrity describes a person who is morally principled, who is fair, honest and sincere, someone who cannot be corrupted. In a professional context, it's the quality of possessing and adhering to really high professional standards and moral principles. So failure to follow professional standards actually can lead to a waste of professional time and of course public funding, and that can slow research and undermine professional and public trust, and that can sometimes also result in harm. And one of the issues that I think is a problem is the definition of integrity. We understand, and how this relates to research, we understand the worst offences relating to fraud, but we're less clear on the sort of the more questionable practices, what questionable research practices really are. The poor design and conduct of research, the flexibility that exists for analyses, and this distorted reporting all make it even more challenging to detect. But open science practices really do foster a greater professional standard of integrity. And I think the problem that we have at the moment is that many open science practices are not yet formalised or recognised by institutions, funders, governments. And so it still remains a real challenge to assess research conduct and identify failure to uphold integrity. And so, like I've already discussed, research integrity means conducting research in a way that allows others to have trust and confidence in the methods used and the findings that result from it. And so within an academic institution, conducting research with integrity also means meeting the professional standard that is expected of us. But what happens if the bar is too low or the standards seem to have slipped? Why is it that we can all think of many examples of researchers failing to uphold integrity? And why do so many seem to get away with it? And for me, the answer is simple. It's a failure in leadership. The way in which research misconduct is policed and corrected reflects the integrity of the whole scientific enterprise. And we as scientists are asked to share this obligation to report, or to identify first and then report any scientific misconduct. But it's unclear how well scientists are doing at meeting that obligation. And if what is reported in this article that was a few months ago is true or even partly true, then the failure to uphold research integrity is deplorable. And a leader who's benefited from the fraud must be held accountable. And I know over the years we've seen many similar headlines, and these are the extreme end, I suppose, of the lack of research integrity. But we really do need to ensure that research is conducted with rigour. And as I said earlier, my research is focused on systematic reviews and meta-analysis of animal studies. And it's surprising to me still, after a few years in this field, at how many studies are not conducted with the rigour that we would all expect. Bad practices are ingrained. And I don't doubt that this has happened in part, mostly, in fact, unknowingly and is not intentional. But in this paper here, Natural Selection for Bad Science, they discuss that despite the continued introduction of guidelines, there's still no improvement in the methods. And they argue that in order to improve the culture of science, a shift must be made away from correcting misunderstandings towards rewarding understanding. And that's something I strongly agree with. So this cartoon from a Nature commentary paper back in 2008 really depicts the situation well. Poor research integrity is a symptom, but what is the cause? I think the culture of perverse incentives, this reporting of novel and exciting results in high impact journals to be considered critical route to our career success has no doubt fueled the situation that we find ourselves in. Academics need to be honest, fair, transparent and accountable. We need to stand up for what is right and uphold moral and ethical values. For me, this is necessary even when demonstrating integrity may hinder my career progression. But by displaying integrity, leaders will build trust, and it will be clear that any decisions that are made are based upon the greater good and not for personal gain. We do have to ask questions about validity of the research. Prior to COVID-19, we were already in a crisis. We have the reproducibility crisis, and so it's morally incumbent upon us to improve. And to do so, we need good collaborative leadership at all levels. All stakeholders are required to inspire and drive a cultural change. So I introduced a collaborative leadership model. As already discussed, collaborative working is becoming an increasing feature of academic research, and it offers us great opportunities to ultimately tackle the most ambitious multidisciplinary research questions that a single group just couldn't. The traditional view of leadership in a simplest sense is that leadership involves a leader, those who are being led, the specific situation and a particular task that must be accomplished. The leader in this instance is absolutely key, the most important person. That person influences others by providing the purpose, direction and motivation, and they have the responsibility to accomplish the task and implement any changes necessary to do so. However, this model is extremely outdated. Effective leadership today requires a shared leadership approach, where leaders leverage and operate within teams and teams of teams to accomplish tasks. It's got a lot in common with servant leadership, so putting others above yourself, and transformational leadership, which is developing others to get the best out of them. And it starts with the premise that if you bring the appropriate people together in a constructive way, with good information sharing, they'll create a vision and strategy to address the shared problem, and we'll move forward from there. So collaborative leadership is characterised by silo busting. Silo mentality is synonymous with power struggles and lack of cooperation, loss of productivity, which to me, in my very cynical mindset, sounds a lot like academia at times. It can cause us to misallocate resources, to send out inconsistent messages. We miss opportunity to leverage, and we essentially get consumed by turf wars, as opposed to trying to find common ground and share resources and knowledge, and therefore become more efficient and actually solve our problems. Next is building trust. Trust is the glue that holds us all together, and it's the belief and confidence that we have in the reliability, integrity, and honesty of another. And it's a difficult topic to talk about because trust can never be given blindly. It's something that must be earned, and trust can only be built through honest and transparent communication. And we also want to promote learning. A collaborative environment needs to be nurturing and offer opportunity to share knowledge and experience, as well as educate each other on an ongoing basis. And lastly, is to promote diversity. Research has shown that diverse groups are more effective at problem solving. And policies that promote diversity and inclusion will enhance our ability to draw from the very best talent pool and address the challenges that we face. I think by investing more in our people and improving our team's capabilities, being open to working in collaboration and fostering successful collaboration, we as a community can achieve much more. And employment of this model will really set the conditions to achieve scholarly excellence and ensure that our science is reproducible, interpretable, open and transparent. We'll bring the riot back into science. So with that in mind, what can we do? What does this look like in real life? Is our priority really publishing as much as possible to the detriment of our research integrity, but just to advance our careers? Because that's what our behaviours suggest. There needs to be a separation between publishing and career progression so that researchers can focus on making meaningful contributions. Of course, I'm not suggesting that we're not making meaningful contributions already. It's just that the incentive structure that currently exists is damaging and undermines this. And it's my desire to see a step change in how researchers are evaluated and rewarded, so we move away from rewarding quantity and that we look at quality. And I believe that everyone has agency and everyone at every level has a responsibility to drive cultural change. We just have, sorry. Let's do that. Sorry about that. I think that's my slides back up. And so I do believe that we can all do something within our own sphere of influence. But generally speaking, funders can incentivise rigour over results. We can adopt more open science practices to force more collaborative working, shared responsibility. So there's never a temptation to undermine the integrity of research. Publishers can uphold guidelines and have more robust retraction processes. Institutions have a really large role to play. They set the standards and the culture, which requires clear policies and reporting. They can hold individuals to account and protect whistleblowers. A common concern of reporting misconduct is that it will lead to negative outcome for the whistleblower. You know, if we want to build integrity, then researchers need to be educated on this. I read a Nature article that directed the education at junior members of staff, but I don't think that's really helpful way of distinguishing it. In fact, everyone needs to understand integrity and be held accountable. And I know many examples of misconduct among more senior staff, and given the power imbalance, it's actually really difficult for a junior member of staff to challenge. So everyone has a responsibility, and within the collaborative leadership model, they should feel empowered to lead by example and take the hard right over an easy wrong to uphold our values. This list of what we can do is not exhaustive. There are ideas to just generate discussion, but most importantly also to demonstrate I think it's in our gift to do something. I know that with our audience I'm probably preaching to the converted here, but we can all raise awareness about open science practices to ensure the integrity and excellence of our work. So hopefully I've convinced you that leadership development is important, and it's not just for those in formal leadership positions, and that our behaviours have impact on people and on our research, and a much wider impact as well. And therefore it's important to understand the fundamental principles of good leadership from the earliest career opportunity. Good leadership is based upon first principles, and though we will face different challenges at different points of our career, those will always be the same. Good leadership is key to our success and that of the people around us, and good leadership takes practice and commitment. I leave with you one last comment. For me, like my military service, being a researcher is a form of service, and I know that I'm sure many of you share my view, but I would like to see more demonstrated. So thank you for your time. And now welcome your questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Nadia. So I have one question already.
Cool.
And that's from Sarah. So she asks, I've had leadership training, but it didn't teach me a great deal. I don't already know. And receiving leadership training does not guarantee you become a good leader. Leadership is heavily dependent on personality, attitude, culture, some of which are hard to change by training and value statements. How do you ensure leadership training is meaningful?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think one of the things that we currently are lacking, though, is just those value statements and a collective understanding. So we need that before we can move forwards. I think the next thing to ensure that it's meaningful is that we need to, in our situation, drive a change of culture, because it's only meaningful if we say it is, and that we then need to make sure that there is time and space to conduct it as properly as possible, that we're supported in doing so, that we are always discussing these issues that surround leadership and what it is to be an effective leader. There is a lot of concern also that we don't necessarily even understand what good leadership should look like in an academic context. And there will be different situations that require different leadership styles. When it comes to personality and personality traits, I tend to veer away from talking about leadership in that way, because I do think in the most simplest sense, we're just asking people to consider the impact of their actions. And if you do that, we are some way closer to being good leaders, because for me, everyone is a leader. Everyone has an impact over somebody else. All of us as researchers are conducting work that has some form of societal impact. So we all have a responsibility to be a leader within our field, whether that's leading ourselves or leading others. This is just going some way to ensuring that we have a basic understanding and we uphold the most basic standard.
And I think also it's important to point out that, you know, leadership is at different stages and at different areas within, say, a collaborative project, right? Of course, you will have a gradual sort of reduction in the numbers at the top, but at each level there will require some form of leadership, and the training will be dependent on that sort of specialization of that individual or individuals.
Yeah.
One question I have, Nadia, is what would your training look like? I know that you have done a few sort of several days working with professors and junior academics in affiliation with the UKRN. I wonder whether you could just tell us a bit more about that, and what does it look like? What kind of training would you recommend?
Yeah, so we've developed a 2-day training retreat, really. It's a workshop. Our aim is that during this workshop we provide the time and space for reflection, as well as peer-to-peer led discussion for essentially peer-to-peer led learning and sharing of experiences. There's so many different examples of good and bad leadership in different situations. So what we try to do is break it down into major themes. So we start off with just talking about leadership theories and just trying to understand our place as who we are as an individual, the team that we work in, and then the broader context. And then we move on from the theory into understanding the themes. So we discuss academic culture, we discuss understanding ourselves and others, we discuss leadership in practice and what that can look like. And it's very peer-led, because the idea that someone can come and tell you how to do something, there's no prescribed method. We all, to an extent, do things by trial and error, but this is just we're trying to just give people the backbone and the principles that they can use to really guide best practice. What we do feel perhaps, or what I feel perhaps that's sometimes lacking, is the support from institutions. I think it can be a lot easier for individuals to choose and make a clear choice of what is right or wrong, and have an idea of what they would like to do about it. But often there aren't guidelines that support that. I have a recent example of this, that, you know, I know somebody who has, we've reported an issue of misconduct, and actually we haven't had the support that one would expect, and the guidelines just aren't there for us to follow, and so it becomes quite difficult. But during our 2-day workshop, we just want to bring lots of different people together from different institutions to share their experiences, and we just provide a framework for that.
Wonderful. We have a question from Mittal. I think this is Mittal Mehta, a previous R.I.O.T speaker, and actually an exemplary leader. I hope it doesn't sound gushing of me to say that, but he is very much an important leader in the King's College London. And he asks, I think you are right in that academia is simultaneously one large community and a multitude of small communities. This creates a complex hierarchical structure. It also has a lot of diversity. I wonder how you think this affects leadership structures, and if this links to your army analogy.
Yeah, I think the army has a very similar structure in that sense. And what we need the larger component, the organisation, to do is just to provide us a very loose framework. But within each small team, that can be interpreted in many different ways. I think one of the things that is quite a useful exercise to do within any team is to actually have a discussion about what your values are and what behaviours we have that we would expect to see to uphold those values. They will be different to different people, and there will be different emphasis on specific values, particularly given our broad cultural diversity as well. We have very different ways of operating, and I think within any team we need to understand that. I don't think it would be appropriate for an organisation to say that this is exactly how one group should behave or not. I think we just need to have broad overarching soft touch. This is sort of the left and right of good and bad. Find your way within that, giving, I suppose, taking into consideration everyone's needs as best as possible and taking the best aspects from it. We can all learn from each other, and find what works as a little team, because those are the people that you're with all the time, but recognize you may need to change some of those behaviors if working with a different team. We need to find common ground where possible too.
Wonderful. I think that's the question. Yeah, no, I think it does. I think it's well said too. There's one question from Anonymous, but I think it's quite difficult for you to answer given your base at Imperial. But it goes: Kings and the IOPPN, the Institute of Psychology Neuroscience, has developed value statements, although they call them something different. It might be useful to consider how they map onto your value set. So I guess could that be one way that you sort of at least raise awareness and give oxygen to this idea, is to start with value statements or something like that? I don't know whether that's what the question is asking, but would you like to?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it highlights a really interesting point. I think a lot of institutions have value statements actually, and I suppose my values are just ones that I think are really common to all of us. And I would really be interested in exploring this in more depth and thinking how, why, I suppose, what are the differences? What do these value statements really mean? How do they differ? For someone at King's, is their value statement different to mine at Imperial? But does that really mean that we're different in how we approach something, or do we actually have shared values? So I am interested in understanding this. I don't know what the IOPPN value statement is and whether it is in depth or whether you feel that there is value in it. I'd be really interested to know that as well. Do you think it's upheld? Or is this just something that organisations do to appear as though they have values?
I mean, I'm probably too cynical for a postdoc, but maybe I'm the right amount of cynical. But I think it's just window dressing, really. I think value statements do serve some purpose, but I think the concern is that it would be just those sort of statements and no further. There will be no kind of further real implementation of them, and they are kind of very difficult to disagree with, which makes me think that they are just window dressing anyway. That's my kind.
I think you raised an important point, and I think it also relates to all the questions that I've had so far. Mm-hmm. Maybe I haven't yet emphasised enough. I suppose one of the things that leadership development is something that never stops. It happens continually over time. Values only mean something if they're upheld and if people are held to account. If you just have a value statement, it doesn't mean anything. We have to uphold those values. And we currently have a culture that perhaps doesn't do that. And so introducing these ideas at the earliest stage of anyone's career and continually going back and looking at it and asking ourselves, have we upheld this value? What could we do better? Is this fit for purpose? It are just things that we're not currently doing. And that's what I kind of hope that I'll be involved in the future, is sort of really understanding what we need in academia to equip us with the skills for moving forward. We're in a, we work in a really challenging environment, and leadership is really important.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I do hope you are involved. We need somebody from the armed forces, I think, to shake things up. Roger Gina Sorola has asked a question. How do you change the culture of evaluation in academia that strongly incentivizes developing a heroic individual reputation?
Yeah, so I hope that someone at the moment is writing a commentary on science and celebrities within science, because I think we're watching a really interesting time? Well, I guess I don't pertain to have the answers, but I think it just probably has to start with the funders, where the money is. It's the only, I can only see that to be the only way, is for when the different sorts of behaviours are incentivized. Instead of looking at individual output, we start assessing teamwork, and we start asking how many collaborations people are involved in, and we start asking exactly what people's roles were within that. And I think maybe we will never move away from, there will always be great individuals. It's just that perhaps the great individuals are there on merit. I think maybe what we currently question is whether all of those who we believe to be great, whether they really are great, or whether they've got there through different mechanisms.
Yeah, I totally agree. Again, I'm sorry to keep intruding my own opinion on this, but I think the fields are, disciplines all over are moving towards collaborative projects, particularly at the IOPPN. That the recent research strategy was to foster greater collaboration internationally, and I just think if you are seen to be somebody that is open to collaboration, that is fair, that will apportion credit where it's due, that treats their staff and students properly and with integrity, then they will increase their likelihood of further collaboration. So they will have pressure to behave in a way that is the hope is, though, that this does manifest itself in the kind of ad hoc private discussions between individual staff members, and not in addition to their work as well, which is sort of Mitchell has returned and sort of give support to what you said earlier, which is value statements don't affect the behaviour of those whose behaviour needs to change. They may also do there may also be get out of jail cards for the leadership. So I agree that values need to be seen to be upheld. So I guess one thing that I'm always sort of interested in is sort of whistleblowers, and I know that we're trying to organise an event that looks into the sort of costs to correcting bad science, and I wonder what people have discussed with you in your previous talks regarding whistleblowers and how people who try to correct for these things, that try to call out people that are conducting misconduct. What would you do to sort of empower these individuals? How could that be enforced?
I think that there is a problem at the moment, which actually is that whistleblowers often face really negative outcomes, and perhaps in some instances when people have blown the whistle, they've had to be prepared to lose everything, to lose their job, or to lose what was important to them, to no longer be able to work within a field, and I think that's a really sorry and sad place to be, and that definitely still exists. We probably don't have the level of, from the few more severe examples that I've heard of, I think institutions close ranks and don't support individuals because you're just, one individual is not the brand of the institution that they want to protect. And I guess I don't really have an answer to how to empower them, because I think still at the moment it's really risky. But I would say if you are junior and you find yourself in a position that you're not happy with and are very aware of it, I would be looking for mentors to be able to make my plan and get away. I would want to stay within a group that I know shares my values. If it's so severe, I suppose you just have to make a decision. For me, I think maybe because I'm older and maybe still not yet as invested in my academic career, is that I would still make the decision to call it out. As we become more and more conscious of that, I think there will be groups though that also look for those sorts of people. It's a really good quality to have. To uphold your moral and ethical code is so important. It's something that should be valued far greater than anything else. Something I would definitely look for in somebody, not that I'm at a position to ever employ anyone, but yeah, we have to stick to this. It's not an easy situation, but what else is there if we don't? Chaos.
I suppose that's a sort of bittersweet a moment to end, I guess.
Yeah, I don't have the answers.
Yeah, I know. I have one sort of other question, which is sort of so basically at King's, the Research Integrity Office is sort of devising this plan to have kind of designated research integrity champions, and these will offer basically a point of contact where you can go to for advice if people are committing sort of breaches of good conduct, as well as other. So they're kind of a way to signpost and provide an information source for these difficult questions that people find it hard to navigate. My concern, and I want to know what yours is too, my concern is that you run into issues when you designate particular individuals as being, you know, well, it's not a criticism particular of this kind of initiative. It's more broadly speaking that when you designate an individual to uphold certain standards, it runs into issues if that individual, their position is untenable because they themselves have committed sort of infractions of good practice. I'm not sure exactly how the policy, but I think it rests on mainly the deans of research, who I think are, you know, I think it's guaranteed that they would uphold good standards in research, and I think it will be an effective approach. But I notice, as from an early career researcher's perspective, that there are issues surrounding whistleblowing in bullying and harassment, where the person that they have to go to is very often somebody, well, I won't say very often, but can be the person who is probably the worst offender of bullying or harassment, or where there is question marks over whether they will be hold things in confidence. I know this is all conjecture and it's thrown around sort of quite volatile material, but I just want to point to the fact that when you do designate somebody, is that a reliable means to uphold standards? And I wondered what your comments on that are, and whether you've sort of seen any initiatives enacted at particular universities that have seemed to be effective in your opinion.
Yeah, so I agree with the sentiment that when you sort of have one person that is there to be sort of judge, jury and executioner, you can run into problems. But I think with any of these sorts of policies and schemes, that maybe having something is still better than not having anything. Right. That if they exist across multiple institutions or even within departments, that there can be alternative places to go. So it's not just that within one institution there is only one person. So if that person is guilty of doing of some form of misconduct that you've got nowhere else to report it to, there should be more than one person, that's for certain. Maybe what we need is sort of an outside agency that oversees it to kind of ensure that. I do think there have been examples of anonymity not being maintained, even really in the early stages, which has allowed, I suppose, people to be further bullied and harassed and others to get away with some of their misdemeanours. And I think all of those are issues, but it doesn't change the fact that the schemes are required. And I think we've got to find what the right thing is. But I do believe there is a need for something like that.
Yeah.
We need research integrity officers, but we need to ensure that in itself is an institution that does uphold the highest values, and it can not just police everybody else, but it does police itself, or we have an ability to police them also.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think at King's it will. I mean, we have a particularly effective research integrity office that it does have all the right ideas, and they have plenty of consultation. And I think that's probably key, is that you have to build into these kind of initiatives ways to avoid any of these kind of blind sites where the needs of individuals are not being met, but also checks and balances to ensure that they are being upheld, which again goes back to the point about, you know, almost auditing whether these standards are being upheld.
Yeah, I do have one little point to add.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm conscious of time, but is that often we speak about these things as another silo, as something that stands outside of it, but of anything that we do. So we as researchers perhaps would never find ourselves as a research integrity officer, but and that leadership is something that is delivered separate to any other form of technical training that we might receive. I actually would like to see a future whereby those things are just part and parcel of our day-to-day, that, you know, that if you're interested in research integrity, you can still be a primary researcher and whatever your field is, but you can also be a research integrity officer and you go around consulting. You know, it can just be part of your job, as opposed to there being separate departments. Because with that, I suppose we fail to really engender in each individual their responsibility. And really give them the tools and the skills to do what's right in the first instance, but also to recognise or identify what's wrong and know how to navigate the system to report it. At the moment, it's really difficult and extremely challenging. But maybe if we could build in those sorts of roles within our teams, within our small micro teams, then we would go a long way.
Absolutely. Okay, well, I think that's a better note to end on, Nadia, I think. So I will call time. I'll stop the live stream and then you can stay on the call. But thank you everybody for joining. I'll see you next week. Thank you, Nadia, for your time. Hope you stay safe and well, and goodbye everybody until next week. Okay.